In this lesson, I want to discuss why we end up convincing ourselves to fall into the same excuses, make up the same reasons for why we stick to illogical or irrational or unproductive behaviors over and over again. And to do that, there's an interesting study that came out of Harvard University in the 1970s that sheds some insight on why we end up making up the excuses we do, and perhaps more importantly, why we fall for these reasons and let them drive our behavior. So here's what's interesting. The study took 3 groups of people and asked each of them to make a set of copies. So they walked up to the copy machine, the Xerox machine, and the first group used a phrase and they just said, "Excuse me, can I skip ahead in line? I have to make some copies." So, for this group, the other people looked around and were like, "Yeah, we all have to make copies. That's why we're in line here." So only 60% of them were allowed to jump ahead in line. Only 60% of the time did the other people, the random strangers in line, let them move ahead. The second group came in and they said, "Excuse me, I need to use the Xerox machine to make some copies. Do you mind if I jump ahead in line because I'm in a rush?" So for this group, 94% of them were able to skip ahead in line because they had a good reason for doing so. People were like, "Oh, they're in a hurry. Yeah, sure, I'll go ahead and be a good person and let you go ahead." The third group, though, they're the ones who were interesting. So they came in and they, again, wanted to make some copies, and they tapped the people in front of them in the line and said, "Excuse me, can I please use the Xerox machine to make some copies because I have to make some copies?" Now, for this group, 93% of them were able to jump ahead in line. They, again, let them go ahead all the time, but it was a fake reason. They just repeated the thing that they were already doing. They said, "Because I have to make some copies," and it was already clear that they needed to make some copies. And the insight here that comes out of this is that it was simply having a reason and using the word "because" that allowed them to jump ahead in line. They made 93% of people say, "Oh yeah, that's a good reason." And what's interesting about this is that there's a single word, "because," that is the trigger that prompts this loop in our head where we say, "Oh, because something, whatever it is, that must mean you have a good reason for doing it." And we follow this logical or illogical pattern all the time ourselves. We say, "Oh, well, I can't go to the gym because of X, Y, and Z," or "I can't stick to my meditation habit because of this," or "You don't understand because of a particular reason." And as long as we have that key word in there, we think this is a good reason for not doing it. But we have to parse through that a little bit deeper, because so often the reasons that we use for justifying our behavior or our lack of behavior are not good reasons at all. They simply follow that same pattern that we fall into over and over again. And so what I'd like you to do now is think about the excuses that you typically state for why you don't do something, and whether that's actually a core reason for not doing it, a good reason, a justifiable reason, or simply the same loop of justification and reasoning that you follow over and over again. Go ahead and do that now, and I'll see you in the next lesson.